April 17th, 1945, a factory courtyard near Nuremberg, Bavaria. Greta Mueller pressed her palms flat against the cold concrete wall. Behind her, American voices echoed across the fenced compound. The guard had shouted in broken German, "Face the wall, hands up." This was the moment they had warned her about since training. The moment when the Americans would line them up and execute them. She could hear other women crying softly in the fading evening light. Some whispered prayers to God, others simply trembled. Greta closed her eyes and waited for the rifles to fire. If you found this story powerful, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. These forgotten voices from the last days of World War II deserve to be heard. Share this with someone who needs to know what really happened when enemies met face to face in the spring of 1945. The bullets never came. Instead, something impossible happened. Behind her, the American soldiers were laughing. Not cruel laughter. Not the mocking jeers she'd been taught to expect. Just ordinary laughter, like friends sharing a joke at the end of a long shift. And then came a smell Greta hadn't encountered in over 2 years. Coffee. Real, hot, fresh coffee drifting across the April evening air. When she finally turned around, trembling, what she saw would shatter everything the Reich had taught her about the enemy. They were called Helferinnen helpers, young German women, mostly between 18 and 25, who kept the Nazi war machine functioning when the men went to the front. They worked as radio operators in underground bunkers. They decoded Allied transmissions. They tracked bomber formations on plotting boards with wooden sticks. They typed orders that sent divisions east toward the collapsing Russian front. Greta had been one of them. 21 years old, stationed outside Berlin, believing she was serving her fatherland with honor and purpose. She had grown up on propaganda, the posters showing Americans as gangsters and criminals. The weekly newsreels promising final victory with wonder weapons. The warnings whispered among the women that capture by the Allies meant torture, humiliation, death. By March 1945, the illusion was crumbling like ash. Soviet artillery hammered Berlin from the east. British and American bombers turned German cities into mountains of smoking rubble. The radio traffic Greta decoded each night told the real story. Retreat, withdraw, encirclement, surrender impossible. Her commanding officer gathered the women in late March. His voice was steady, but his eyes were hollow and exhausted. Go west, he told them quietly, toward the American lines. The Russians will show no mercy to women in uniform. The Americans at least follow rules of war, so Greta ran. She joined thousands of other women fleeing westward through a dying nation. They walked through cities where buildings still smoked from yesterday's bombs. They slept in barns and ditches. They ate whatever they could scavenge, rotting potatoes, grass, nothing. Their gray-green uniforms became torn and filthy. Their shoes fell apart on the roads, their hair matted with dirt and sweat and fear. After 14 days of walking, Greta's feet were bleeding through her socks. Her group reached the American lines near Nuremberg in mid-April. The American soldiers who found them looked impossibly clean. Young men in pressed uniforms carrying chocolate bars and cigarettes in their pockets. They didn't shout. They didn't strike anyone. They simply pointed toward waiting trucks and said in broken German, "Get in." One soldier, barely 20 years old, offered Greta his canteen. She stared at it. Was it poisoned? Was this a trick before the real torture began? But her throat was so dry it hurt to breathe. She took a small sip, just water. Cold, clean, ordinary water. The soldier smiled at her. He said something in English she couldn't understand. His voice was soft, almost kind. This wasn't how enemies were supposed to behave. The trucks drove for hours through the Bavarian countryside. Through the canvas covering, Greta watched burned-out tanks sitting in muddy fields, destroyed bridges hanging over rivers like broken teeth, children with hollow eyes waving from roadsides. Where were they being taken? One woman whispered the question nobody wanted to voice. "Does it matter?" Another replied. "We're prisoners now. Our lives are finished." Greta said nothing. She just stared at her cracked, bleeding hands. She thought about her mother in Hamburg. Was she still alive? Was their apartment still standing? The last letter she'd received was dated January. 4 months of silence since then. 4 months of wondering whether everyone she loved was dead. The trucks stopped at a former factory complex, now surrounded by barbed wire and wooden guard towers. This would be their first processing center. The women were ordered off the trucks and lined up in rows. American soldiers walked among them, checking papers, taking names and service numbers. Then came the moment that would haunt Greta for the rest of her life. A guard pointed to the concrete wall of the factory building. "Face the wall," he ordered in rough German. "Hands up." Greta's heart stopped. This was it. Everything they'd been told was true. The Americans were going to execute them right here, right now, against this wall. She walked forward on shaking legs. Around her, other women began to sob openly. Some fell to their knees, begging for mercy. One girl, barely 18, started screaming for her mother. Greta pressed her forehead against the cold concrete. She could feel every rough grain of the surface. She thought about her childhood, her parents, the boy she'd loved before the war, killed at Stalingrad in 1943. So this is how it ends, she thought. Against a wall in a foreign land, shot like a criminal. Behind her, American voices continued talking, even joking. How could they laugh before an execution? How could they be so casual about murder? Time stretched impossibly long. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, no gunshots came. Instead, something warm and wet sprayed across her back, then another spray, and another. "Turn around," a voice said in English, not unkindly. Greta turned slowly, certain she would see rifles pointed at her face. Instead, she saw American medics holding spray hoses connected to metal tanks. They were smiling, actually smiling. "Delousing," one of them explained in broken German, pointing to the hose. "Kills the bugs, you understand? No more lice." Greta didn't understand. Not really. Her mind was still waiting for death. But slowly, impossibly, the truth penetrated her fear. They weren't going to be shot. They were being cleaned. The contrast was so shocking she couldn't process it. From execution to disinfection in a single moment. The women were led inside where real showers waited. Hot water poured from the nozzles. Actual soap, white, fragrant, beautiful, sat in dishes along the wall. Greta hadn't seen soap like this in over a year. In Germany, soap had become a luxury people traded wedding rings for. She stepped under the hot water and began to cry, not from fear this time, from complete, overwhelming confusion. The water ran brown as months of accumulated filth washed away. Other women were crying too. Some laughed and cried simultaneously. "I don't understand," one woman kept repeating. "I don't understand." None of them did. Everything they'd been taught was wrong. The Americans were supposed to be animals, criminals in uniform who raped and murdered prisoners. Instead, they were providing hot showers and soap. A young woman named Helga stood under the water so long a guard had to gently tap her shoulder. She had been filthy for so many weeks, she'd forgotten what clean skin felt like. The hot water felt like resurrection, like being born into a different world where the old rules no longer applied. After the showers came clean clothes. Simple work dresses and underwear, nothing fancy, but they were clean. They smelled fresh. They didn't have holes or bloodstains or lice. For women who'd worn the same filthy uniforms for weeks, this felt miraculous. Their old uniforms were taken away and burned. The gray-green cloth that had marked them as servants of the Reich disappeared in flames. Greta watched the smoke rise. Part of her felt relief. Part of her felt a strange sadness, as if her entire identity was burning with those uniforms. Then came the food. The women were led to a large room filled with tables and benches. The smell hit them before they even entered. Meat, bread, coffee, real food. Not the watery soup and sawdust bread they'd survived on for months. Greta sat down and stared at the tray in front of her. A thick slice of meat, potatoes with butter melting on top, green beans, a roll that was soft and white, a cup of coffee with steam rising from its surface. She picked up her fork with trembling hands. Around her, other women were having identical reactions. Some ate so fast they made themselves sick. Others couldn't eat at all, just staring at the food as if it might vanish like a dream. "Is it poisoned?" One woman whispered. "Who cares?" Another replied. "If I die, at least I die with a full stomach." Greta took a bite of the meat. The taste exploded in her mouth, rich, salty, real. Tears ran down her cheeks as she chewed. The contrast was too much. That morning she'd expected to be dead. Instead, she was eating the best meal she'd had in years. An American soldier walked past their table. He saw the women crying and stopped. For a moment his face showed confusion. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a chocolate bar. He set it on the table in front of Greta. "For later," he said slowly in English, pointing at the chocolate. Then he walked away. Greta picked up the Hershey's bar, hands trembling. She'd never heard the name, but she would never forget it. "We were taught they were monsters," she later wrote. "But monsters don't give you chocolate." After 3 days of processing, Greta and the other women were moved to a permanent POW camp in rural southern Germany. Once farmland, it now had fences and towers, yet inside it felt more like a village. Wooden barracks held 50 women each. A mess hall served 3 meals a day. A small store sold goods for camp currency earned through work. Life settled into routine. Wake at 6, breakfast at 7, work until noon, lunch, more work until 5, dinner at 6, lights out at 10. Compared to wartime labor, the tasks were easy kitchen duty, laundry, field work. "This is prison?" One woman muttered. "We worked harder when we were free. There was a chapel, a chaplain, hymns from childhood, and a tiny German-language library the women devoured. After months of fear, reading felt like luxury. But the greatest shock was the food: meat, vegetables, bread, coffee, butter, sugar. Always enough, often too much. Greta stopped hiding scraps only when she realized the meals would keep coming. Her body grew strong again. and with it came crushing guilt. A month later, she wrote home simply, "I am alive and safe." Weeks passed before her mother replied. Bombed out, starving, her brother missing, yet grateful Greta lived. Greta read the letter over and over. Her mother was living in a cellar eating scraps while she sat in an American camp with 3 meals a day and chocolate bars. The unfairness made her physically ill. That night she couldn't eat dinner. She just sat staring at the food, thinking about her mother in the dark cellar. The camp store seemed impossible. Shelves held chocolate bars, cigarettes, toothpaste, soap, combs, even lipstick. Yes, lipstick, in the middle of a prisoner of war camp. Back in Germany, women traded wedding rings for a single bar of soap. Here, soap cost almost nothing in camp currency. Greta bought a chocolate bar and small bottle of shampoo. Walking back to her barracks, she felt like a criminal. How could she enjoy these luxuries when her family had nothing? The American guards added another layer of confusion. They were supposed to be enemies, but they didn't act like enemies. Mostly young men, some barely 20, sent far from home to fight a war they probably didn't fully understand. Some guards were strict and professional. Others were friendly, trying to practice their German, or sharing cigarettes through the fence. One guard, a round-faced young man from Wisconsin named Tommy, often worked near the laundry where Greta was assigned. Every day he would try to teach her an English word. "Coffee," he would say, pointing to his cup. "Coffee," Greta would repeat. "Good," Tommy would grin. "Tomorrow I teach you another word." It was such a small thing, but it was also enormous. Here was an American who didn't see her as an enemy or a Nazi. He just saw her as a person worth talking to. Greta began to look forward to Tommy's daily lessons. Bread, he would say one day, water the next. Friend. The words accumulated slowly, each one a small bridge across the gap between enemy and something else. Something that didn't have a name yet. As months passed, something cracked inside Greta. The beliefs she'd grown up with began to crumble like old paint falling from a wall. She'd been raised to believe Germans were superior. She'd been taught Americans were greedy, selfish, cruel. She'd been told the Reich was fighting for a noble cause against Jewish conspiracies and Bolshevik hordes. But what she saw in the camp didn't match what she'd been taught. The Americans weren't cruel. They were organized, efficient, often kind. They fed their prisoners better than Germany fed its own citizens. They provided medicine when people got sick. They didn't torture anyone or shoot people for small mistakes. They treated the women with a dignity that was almost painful in its contrast to expectations. One night, lying in her bunk, Greta found herself asking dangerous questions. If the Americans are so evil, why do they treat us so well? If Germany was fighting for good, why did we lose everything? If our leaders were right, why are we here? She didn't have answers, but the questions kept coming. Once you started asking them, they didn't stop. Once a week, the camp showed movies. American films projected onto a sheet in the mess hall. At first the women watched with suspicion, certain it was enemy propaganda. But the films were harmless. People singing, laughing, falling in love. Ordinary lives untouched by war. Greta found herself humming the songs afterward. America looked colorful, wealthy, impossibly free. A different world entirely. Then came the day everything truly changed. All prisoners were ordered into the mess hall to watch a special film. No one explained what it was about. The projector flickered to life, and Greta saw hell. the liberation of concentration camps. Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, mountains of corpses, starving survivors who looked like walking skeletons, gas chambers, crematoria, evidence beyond imagination. Some women hid their faces. Others fled outside in tears. Greta sat frozen, unable to look away. She had heard rumors during the war, whispers about camps and deportations, but she had dismissed them as enemy lies, propaganda to make Germany look evil. Now she saw the truth, and the truth was beyond any propaganda. No one spoke afterward. The women returned to their barracks in silence. That night Greta wrote, "I served the people who did this. What does that make me?" Shame hollowed her. She had believed in honor and duty. Instead, she had served monsters. The Americans treated the prisoners with dignity. That hurt more than punishment. Cruelty would have felt like justice. Kindness left her with nowhere to place her guilt. In July, she was sent with others to work at an American base. The abundance shocked her. New equipment, endless food, fuel thrown away, trucks in perfect rows, aircraft gleaming. She realized Germany had never stood a chance against a nation that could produce this much and still feed its prisoners chocolate. Back at camp, she saw herself in a mirror healthier than she had looked in years, while her mother lived in a cellar. "Their kindness broke me more than cruelty," she wrote, "because I cannot hate them." In spring 1946, prisoners were released. Greta returned to a ruined Germany. Hamburg was unrecognizable. She found her mother in the cellar of their destroyed building, aged and gaunt. Greta gave her a bar of soap. Her mother held it like treasure. "They treated you well?" she asked. Greta nodded. "Better than we deserved." Greta lived to 89, telling her story to anyone who would listen. "They could have shot us," she'd say. "Instead of cruelty, they showed us what we could have been." Against a wall in Bavaria, Greta Muller learned the difference between revenge and justice, between power and humanity, and the cost of seeing the enemy as human.